yeah, a couple of days ago, it was just serendipitously the anniversary of the release of Alien 3.
Yeah, because I contacted you. I'd watched a YouTube video, which I gave you the link of this guy. I watched you, which I kind of want to cover stuff like that. We cover like mishaps in film history and stuff like this. That's the stuff that interests me the most, is like how this fucking shit gets made and how Star Wars became the monster that it is and things like that. Mm-hmm. There's underlying stuff that regular people don't care about. They care about the movie good, movie bad. That's it.
Yeah.
Here's my money, don't have money. You know what I mean? Simple binary on off. That's how the transaction works on the bottom end. But it's so fucking complex and complicated and convoluted to make a movie, especially one of a franchise of that magnitude, coming off of fucking Aliens 2, or Aliens is the official name of the film. That was 86, I have here.
Yeah, 86 was Aliens.
Aliens came out in 86. They were getting ready to launch another film immediately after that. So they started production right after the film got out of the gate.
Well, the thing is like these films were, they were relatively low budget.
That's right.
In the ways that they were being made.
The budget...
and so you're talking about just huge returns.
The budget for Aliens,
low budget productions.
The budget for Aliens in 1986 was $18 million, and it made $200 million.
Yeah. So you're talking massive returns. You're talking Deadpool returns.
Yeah, disgusting amounts of money in return for, and it doesn't feel low budget. It doesn't. They did such a good job because they did such a good job with the cinematography in Alien and Aliens that any set like that, because I went back and watched the first one to kind of review the feel of the films. I'm gonna watch Aliens tonight. They're on Amazon right now if you want to watch them. But the set could be cheesy, and like all the stuff around it could be like seen as like really shitty or off job. But they only have like a handful of sets in the first Alien movie, maybe like 3 or 4, period. And they really went over the top building those 4 sets, so they didn't shoot a bunch of fucking locations, which saved a bunch of money.
And if nothing else, like there's a craftsmanship to Aliens that I love. Like looking at some of the props and everything,
and it's all done on miniatures.
Yeah, it's a bunch of miniatures.
Most of the bigger shots are like high class miniatures
and things,
similar to like the Gundam stuff that we're talking about. These high end Gundam models that we're into. It's the same kind of thing. These guys are sitting there building these fucking crazy spaceships and stuff.
Well, those big old machine guns and stuff that those guys are running around with in Aliens.
The smart guns?
Yeah, the smart guns. Those are basically, I think they're MG42s on Steadicam rigs.
I think the back end is an MG42, and they've put like some crazy barrel on it to make it look like it's 2 spinning chain guns or something like that.
But that whole armature that they've got, it's a Steadicam rig that they just had.
Right.
And so they're just like, all right, let's just duct tape a freaking machine gun to a Steadicam rig. Their magazine is, it's like some kind of a cartridge, like a game cartridge almost or something. I can't remember what was the prop that they used.
It's an activation thing on top of it. So just all that chip is that they hand back and forth is what activates the weapon.
Right, but I think the prop itself was like some kind of a game cartridge or...
I can't remember what it was. It's like an Atari cartridge or some offshoot of an Atari. Something like that similar. But it's the cartridge unit is the memory for the... It's like they're doing now with modern guns. It's your chip that allows you to activate the weapon. Is the lore of the Aliens, and all of them have them. In the pulse rifles that they have, it's supposed to be in the magazine. That's why they jam the magazine up before they shoot. It's part of that big biscuit on the bottom.
Those pulse rifles, where it's essentially it's a Thompson submachine gun with a Remington taped to the barrel.
Did you ever see somebody made a functioning version of that pistol? You it's 9mm or something like that, or 380. They've managed to produce, I think it was a 380 because that's what you could match the magazine capacity with.
For which gun?
For the pulsar rifle.
For the pulsar rifle, that would be a 45.
No, the one that they remade, the actual one. I think it was like a fucking smaller caliber round.
They were literally just using Thompson submachine guns.
It's 100 rounds. Well, it's a 100-round mag, and somebody managed to match it. So like in the film, they're not using 100-round mags. It says 100 rounds. But in the lore of the thing, that's a 100-round magazine, and they're tiny little bullets, high velocity rounds, which is why they fucking can shred aliens. You know what I mean? So that's as far as I could tell. I think it was a 380. I'd have to find the video. They even made a digital.
Show me that.
They made a digital counter on the magazine too to count legitimately that works. Wow. So like a Halo gun, you know what I mean?
Well, I remember like looking back in the day, somebody made like a high-end laser tag gun version of the Aliens pulse rifles.
It's probably one of my favorite like movie guns. Because everything's been copied after that.
Yeah. There was actually an airsoft version came out a couple of years ago. Really? I remember that, yeah.
That would be really cool. That would make sense because that would match like your magazine capacity. But the problem is you can't aim it. There's no fucking real sight.
Right, yeah, there's no sights on it or
They
nothing.
set it up to spray and pray. Those weapons are just for fucking hose it down. It's got 100 rounds. Fuck it.
Yeah.
They're Space Marines, not fucking special ops, dude. They're like, you're just fucking hosing. It's similar to Warhammer where they just send you out with a maximum capacity magazine and just empty it and put in a new one. These guys aren't fucking technicians that they're sending in Aliens. They fucking send in Bill Paxton, and he's always the leader in my mind. It's Bill Paxton, but
yeah,
you got the great sergeant who fucking they copied in Halo. The Halo series has the same sergeant. It's definitely him, the same guy. They send in, which we're fucking explaining the plot of Aliens, which people have probably already seen it. You know what I mean? I love that movie so much. I've always been a huge fan of that franchise up until that third one.
Right.
Because they took... It's ideally, the first Alien is almost a perfect film in my way of looking at it because it's a perfect sci-fi horror movie. And it works so well because they don't show the monster very much.
No.
You have these really interesting characters in a believable backdrop setting in the sci-fi world. So, like, they're just regular people, like, driving a truck, basically.
They're just cargo drivers, pretty much. Yeah.
Hauling a ship or whatever, that's all they do. They're just regular dudes. And this is the world that we're in. We're so far in the future that's just like a regular thing you do.
Well, and you spend so much time with them in that first little bit in Alien where, you learn about this crew, you learn about their character traits.
And everything's so well explained and defined.
Right. And all of it ends up, having some kind of a payoff later on when
it does.
Shit hits the fan
That's
and they're
right.
actually facing a crisis.
Your character traits, which is copied in The Thing also. They copied the same kind of mode. Which is good for, like, they've done this since, like, classic horror movies back in the 50s and shit. You know what I mean? Like, you have your archetype built early on.
Well, you got to think about, like, Alien had such a specific aesthetic that has become kind of, derivatory since. But you got to think about the time. It came out in 1979.
79 for the first Alien.
What, 2 years after Star Wars?
That's right.
And stuff. So our big blockbuster at this point for sci-fi is Star Wars, which, Star Wars itself kind of redefined Hollywood at the time.
This is why I like sci-fi, because you can build off of somebody else's work without having to mention it.
No.
So, like, the backdrop is already explained for Alien without you having to fucking be like, well, how does the fucking economy, how does this work? How does that work? How does the money work? They're just like a fucking Han Solo dude or whatever. They fucking just do their job. And they get woken up from hypersleep halfway through their trip in the middle of uncharted space.
Mm-hmm. Somebody
else's territory. As you find out in this other version of Alien 3, which they've disavowed. It doesn't happen in the mainline canon of the Alien
I got
franchise.
a feeling that's going to change,
I hope
that
it does.
as this kind of takes off.
I hope it does.
But so Alien, they managed to build this aesthetic for sci-fi in such a way it was almost like a comparable to a Kubrick version of sci-fi.
It was. I think it's definitely complemented by Kubrick.
Just kind of almost a stark realism to a lot of the tech and the ideas, because it's interstellar travel with 80s technology.
Yeah, 80s computers and
80s
stuff.
computers
It has a fucking
and shit
cool
and
feel.
stuff. So I mean, it's you've got that kind of aesthetic to it all, but it's this dark horror sci-fi where it's like, no, like space, it's different from Star Trek, it's different from Star Wars, where you don't have these, we didn't decide to go out into space after we had figured out everything at home and gotten all of our shit put together in the way they did in Star Trek.
They're just bucking out there to halt war.
They're just like, you know what? Private businesses are just going to send people out there to make money out in space.
Your SpaceX, your Virgin Mobile, or whatever that became the Virgin Space,
which people can relate to, I think, a lot more. That's another thing with this is it's a sci-fi world that people can relate to.
It's super believable.
It is,
even going into it out the gate, and they make it so organic that when you walk into the film, anybody can just grasp it and be like, I understand the world without it having it handed to me on a plate. It's not like high concept like Star Trek where things kind of have to be laid out to you a little bit, where they kind of explain how the lore and the world works. Or Star Wars, they have to fucking literally read it out to you on how the world works. At the beginning of Star Wars, they have to hold your hand and tell you, this is how the world works and the war is happening right now. They don't have to do any of that. Nope. It's so smart that you can walk in and
they're
be
just like Nostromo shipping vessel out in this sector gets a distress beacon.
Distress beacon picked up.
And then so then the crew wakes up and they're just like, well, what the fuck? Why did we wake up in the middle of the journey? And they're like, there's a distress beacon. The company wants us to check it out.
And they're sitting there. They have multiple characters arguing for different things. They were talking about their bonuses when they get told, we're woken up because we have to go to this bullshit planet. In the middle of nowhere. It's LV-426.
Yeah.
And such, which becomes an ominous planet later on, because in Aliens they return to that same planet, which has been colonized by a people that they want to branch off from regular society and live their own life like prairie people on this uncharted planet.
Right, yeah, it's just this sort of this pioneer
trying to make their own way in deep space. All of it's pretty believable. It all kind of, you can apply it to whatever you want, you know what I mean? It's pretty organically set out, but so beautifully and intelligently that it feels so big, and you're just in a small set. So like the whole universe feels huge outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And done on such a small scale, and that's the beauty of it. I think is that it feels huge.
Yeah.
The whole time that you're trapped inside this spaceship with this creature, the whole thing feels big, and like the second movie complements that.
But again, a relatively limited budget.
Exactly. And done
that this production is being built upon.
The Aliens is done with like maybe 7 stuntmen in suits, and they reuse those creatures over and over again.
Yeah.
Just shot differently and beautifully, so where you don't even notice, because the creature is so uniformly the same that you don't question it, because it's so well established how the creature works early on, which is another rule of mine, because in the first Alien, they build how the creature works beautifully.
Yeah.
This is how the creature exists. It can exist in extreme environments. It takes its cells and remakes them into almost like this form of plastic silicon, and doesn't need to breathe air, so it can survive in like the most fucked up areas possible.
Yeah.
It doesn't need air. It can survive in the vacuum of space, like Frieza. That's what Frieza is based off of, basically, in Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah.
It can exist in the vacuum of space. That's why it's fucking rippled and been repeated so many times, is because they beautifully lay out, this is how our creature works. Here are the rules of the movie. And in a good monster movie, it is handed to you and explained, here's how the creature works. It just so happens that it's a fucking perfect killing machine, and there's nothing you can do about it when you're trapped with no weapons and a mining vessel. So like, it's a perfect setting. This thing has acid blood, obviously people know about that. It's been overused and used improperly in other movies. Your Alien versus Predator, your weird sequels where they establish how fucking rugged that acid is in the first couple of scenes when they cut the face hugger, and it goes
goes through
like
multiple decks in the ship. Yeah.
And they're like, holy fuck,
like, dude, this is the worst possible thing on a vessel like this that we can run into.
So no ballistic damage. You can't do anything to it to hurt it.
Yeah, you don't want to physically damage it, because you'll mess your ship up. Yeah.
Yeah, you're done. So now you're fucked. Like, you have limited options because the rules are so beautifully set out. And this is another thing when I'm talking about the genius of the whole thing, is that they've engineered this creature, which in my idea is like one of the perfect movie monsters. Because they've taken something that now it's like unkillable in this circumstance, and you're trapped with it, and it's slowly eating your crew. There's a director's cut that explains... they cut one of these scenes from the film where they find Dallas still alive in the lower decks, in the engine decks, and he's sealed to the wall, and it's getting ready to lay eggs. And they establish later that, I think in the third book, the one that we read, they established that they can split off and become a queen if they have enough hosts nearby.
Right.
They'll switch over.
They have multiple avenues for breeding.
That's right.
Yeah.
So they'll switch and then start generating their own eggs without a host. Like they can breed like frogs or whatever without a host or what have you. Like cellular mitosis or whatever, they can, what have you, they can breed on their own. The perfect species.
Yeah.
All it knows is destruction and fucking create more. Kill more, create more. That's all it does, is to make more of itself. It exists like that. They're a hive mind, which you find out in the second movie, because they add more to the creature beautifully. But now, in the second movie, you can fight them, because you're on a fucking planet. So now it's an action movie.
Now we get an action setting for this.
Because you have some badass space marines who get off the ship. It's a small faction. They're supposed to show up, figure out what's going on. She's supposed to tell them what's going on about these creatures, which are allegedly on this planet, because they have a briefing about the ship.
Well, and again, like, there's so many little things that are established in the script of Aliens that never get explained.
Right.
So, like, they mention going into the, there's a bit of slang that the soldiers use, like
xenomorphs.
Well, but things like bug hunt.
Right.
Where they're just like, oh, is this just going to be another bug hunt?
Which they've been doing it before.
They've been doing it before, but some people have tried to figure out. They're like, okay, have they been fighting xenomorphs before? But they seem pretty surprised in Aliens when they run into them. So it turns out, kind of looking ahead into this audiobook, they actually do end up explaining it and stuff, and explaining that as Weyland-Yutani has been sending out colonists to colonize other planets. They run into naturally occurring flora and fauna that they'll just send out colonial marines to just eradicate, to clear paths for the colonists,
to pacify the planet, as they say in Warhammer.
To pacify it and everything. And so they've been doing that.
Okay, that makes sense. And
so that's what these soldiers are thinking that they're going to be doing. They're like, oh, it's just the naturally occurring flora from this planet.
Wipe the slate clean.
Yeah.
They don't. That's one of the things that I wish they did touch on. And this script, I want to reread it again, dude. I loved it so much.
Oh yeah, it's so good. And it's
what we're talking about. To backtrack a little bit, why we're digging into this.
Let's get into kind of the history of this audiobook that we listened to.
So we have the setting for Aliens 3. Now there's a history behind Aliens 3. We're talking about how good the first two movies are, and they're so solidly written. And like they stand out, which is why they've aged so well. I rewatched them and I was like, God, they're just so fucking perfect. And the way they used everything at their disposal effectively when making the film, and it's all done through classic monster movie tropes. Because that when they use computers to animate things, they don't age very well.
No, especially from that era. Yeah,
and it's never ever stood out to me as something that has been like, oh, that's cheesy. It's always been like, God, like it's so fucking surgically precise with their delivery on how they wanted to deliver the horror that these monsters give forth.
Well, it's like Jaws, where they're working around their limitations and able to make it more effective. Yeah.
Exactly. And they had great suits, believe it or not. Like if you've ever seen the suit standing in full light, there's details, minuscule details throughout the whole suit where it's beautifully done. But they don't use it that way. It's only for like a snap, a quick glimpse when you actually get to see one before you're dead. And it's usually before somebody's taken out. That's the only time you ever get to see one up close. Either that or you're blowing them to fucking pieces when you're running through with your grenade launchers and stuff. And you hardly get to see them when they're wasting them, besides like half a second, you know what I mean, before they blow them up. But they had another script set up. So this, in 86, the studio wanted another one. And I have a synopsis here.
Like, let's get it done now. Let's strike while the iron's hot.
So they set up to do this other film. The original script was written for Alien 3 by a couple other people, but they ended up picking up one by William Gibson, who's considered the godfather of cyberpunk.
Well, and he himself, when they contacted him, the Brandywine guys, which Brandywine Company is, they're the production company that makes these Aliens movies.
Right.
Like it's the original guys put together this whole concept and everything. That's Brandywine.
Right.
And so they get this William Gibson guy because he's doing these futurist cyberpunk stories.
A lot of really good books that I put on my wish list too.
Yeah.
To pick up here in the future.
Yeah. So
there's a short story
Neuromancer,
called Neuromancer, Chrome, a few things like that. Things that end up inspiring other authors at the time, like Philip K. Dick and guys like this who were doing stuff that inspired Blade Runner.
But William Gibson himself, like when Brandywine called him, they're like, "Hey, we want you to write the next script." He's like, "That's funny because I based my whole aesthetic of my stories off of your guys' movies."
Right.
Like he loved that, technological, almost retroism.
And the realistic feel to the gritty.
Yeah,
realistic
feel.
The first movie inspired most of his everything.
But the utilitarian nature of their technology and everything.
Yeah, there's nothing sleek, nothing sexy about any of the stuff that they have.
He, that was what really inspired his story. So he's like, yeah, I'd love to, write a story for you guys for this. So he makes a script treatment, he makes a script based off of the treatments that these guys already had. Like the Brandywine guys already had an idea.
There was people that were working on it and playing with it.
Yeah.
But they were looking for somebody to flesh it out for a screenplay.
Yeah.
Which is, a lot of people don't know, when movies are being made, there's about 100 bajillion, maybe billions of screenplays is floating around out there right now that have been adapted and are possibly never used. For an instance, I was talking to a friend a long time ago, and he firmly believes that every other Die Hard movie is a screenplay or script that they took from something else and put the main characters into to make a Die Hard
I could see that.
movie. That's how most of your movies kind of end up getting made. They float around. So this is the nature of Hollywood, is that these things are always picked up. The screenwriters or the writers get paid some money for their ideas and their hard work on typing these things out. William Gibson was a novelist at the time who was really into this futuristic setting, who I think would have been, after reading the book, his shit hits so hard. The problem is his script was following the lines of with a communist Cold War feel. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of communist metaphors and Cold War metaphors in the film.
Yeah.
Because in this version of the script, which people famously have, if you've seen Aliens 3, it's completely different than this script. This script takes place amongst a bunch of monks or something like that, or then in a small space station.
Right. Yeah, that was one.
That's right. I think that's the setting for this book. But there's multiple versions. There's one where they would go to a wooden planet filled with monks, which is a next offshoot of that, which explains the no weapons, and I'll explain the history of some of that as we go along. So the history marches forward. They take his script and they love it. His script is set with Cold War metaphors, like I said. This happens
but also they were trying to structure. They didn't just want to do one sequel. They wanted to do two sequels.
Movies. Yes,
they wanted to do basically a part 1, part 2 story following Aliens, where they were like, okay, let's take Sigourney Weaver, throw her into the background, and let's make a story focusing around Hicks.
That's right.
Hicks's character for the next one, because Sigourney Weaver herself was also just kind of checking out on the whole thing.
She was okayed the project because she was going to be a side character in the film.
And so she was like, that's cool. I'm fine. And we had Michael Biehn, who was, getting to be a pretty big golden boy at the time.
He was a rising star at the time. He owned the 80s for the most part, early on, 80s and early 90s, as your typical action guy. If you don't know who he is Corporal Reese. Or not Corporal Reese.
Kyle Reese, yeah.
He's Kyle Reese and Corporal Hicks. And he's been in movies similar to that mode on through. But that was the downfall of his career because they started changing the film around. The main guy from Fox read this script when they were getting ready to roll forward and didn't like it because he's like, Ripley is not a main character in the story. I want Ripley to be a main character in the story.
Well, one of the other things was the fact that they wanted to do part 1 and part 2 was the Brandywine guys were like, okay, well, if we're going to do this, and this is like before Lord of the Rings and everything, but they were like, we got to make both of these movies in a single production schedule.
Right.
One long extended production schedule to make two movies. That'll reduce the cost.
And it keeps from fucking up the feel of both of the films. So, when you leave the other film and go back into the next one, it's not so fucking shocking.
Right.
Because when they do that with other films and they don't continue production all the way through, it's jarring. You can tell that things are different. You can feel it. You know what I mean? That's how you do it.
Well, and so then, so the studio comes back and they're like, okay, but they throw in their first poison pill, and that's you got to get Ridley Scott to direct it. Then, if you're going to do that,
now I have
conflicting. They approached Ridley Scott, and he was like, that sounds really cool, but at this point, Ridley Scott, he's freaking Golden Boy, so he's busy.
Well, he was on a production for something else. Now, as far as
he was already busy, so he couldn't.
I don't remember what he was
extended...
working on here. I couldn't find exactly what he was working on at the time that kept him from working.
I don't know, it might have been Blade Runner or something.
He wanted to do Alien 3.
He did. Like, he did, and they initially approached him for it, but it was the whole extended production of 2 movies. Threw things off because his schedule wouldn't allow it. Because that's a massive, major. If you go into the making of Lord of the Rings, and you look at some of the initial casting ideas that they had, most of them didn't work because they were A-listers that were too busy to commit to the production schedule of Lord of the Rings.
Which is the fucking nature of the thing, man. That's the nature of the beast.
Yeah, and so that was kind of the first poison pill, because then the studio was like, well, if you're not going to get Ridley Scott to do it, we're not so sure about this whole project. And so they started, hedging and started whinging. And
which is what caused the production to start backpedaling. Fox is kind of notorious for doing this kind of thing, not as bad as some other production companies. This is probably their biggest mistake, in my opinion, their biggest fuck-up. Is fucking up Alien 3.
And so this script, it's got heavy Cold War influences, where you got the capitalist West versus the communist East.
Exactly what I'm leading into on my notes here next.
Right.
So if you look at the time, why we're producing this movie. So they're writing it here in 87 to 89. That's when everything is being put together. William Gibson finished his script and his screenplay, and they were getting ready to roll forward. The wall falls. And the fall of communism happens in 1989. The revolutions happen. So the fall of communism takes place right when they're about to begin production. So Fox is like, well, fuck, we can't.
The story's not relevant anymore now.
Yeah, we can't do this film because now it's not going to be popular because they're going to be flooding the market with movies like this at the time. And you had great run-ups that were on this theme, like Red Dawn. And that's like the biggest outlier I can think of. There's a lot of themes where the commie was the bad guy, Rocky.
Yeah.
You name it. Rocky 5, I think
Rocky
he fights.
4, yeah, Rocky 4.
He fights the Russian. Yeah. That was the theme of the 80s at the time. They were building up to this fucking Cold War bubbling under the surface. So they wanted to back off. So they asked him to readapt it, and he's like, well, I'm not going to fucking readapt it. He's like, fuck that.
And so at this point, the whole 2-movie thing starts to go out the window. They're like, we don't even care about that because we don't even care about the script anymore.
That's when it fell off for the 2-movie idea. His screenplay in this script from this audiobook is just from that first movie that was heavily adapted.
The second movie never got written.
No.
They were just trying to get this one next movie off the ground.
And it's set up to kind of how it ends, where it's set up to kind of like
you can see where they're going with it.
Build interest, and they're trying to get people in the door. You know what I mean? But it could also be a standalone film. It would work as a standalone film.
It works really well as a standalone story.
That's what I felt the most about the overall film. It says like it works as another decent Alien movie. Like it's fucking damn decent. Because it's like first part is like drama, and and the second part is your action. The very last half is your crazy survival. But it's a lot of building and establishing for this big run that they're trying to get ready to launch. But that's the stuff that I'm talking about that I'm so into, is this detailed building of how everything works, without focusing on the backdrop on stuff too much. You know what I mean? There's more players in this one because of the communists. There's separatists.
Those almost just like 2 stories running parallel to each other.
Yeah, the first half is the 2 factions. So in Alien 2 ends, Aliens, because that's the actual title. Sorry, not Alien 2. I don't know why they called it Alien 3, right? Because it makes too much sense. They get picked up. So the monster kills everybody on board, or they kill the queen, throw her off. You know how the thing goes, right? That's in the beginning run-up of this book, where they explain end and beginning. So like end of 2, beginning of 3. They kill the queen off. They get put into hypersleep. And the ship just appears and picks them up. So the computer's going off, and Bishop is awake enough, processing, who's the android on board, to detect the ship coming. But
and he's still just a freaking ripped up torso.
He's just half. He's running on survival stuff, so he can't do anything about it. But he can hear the computer going off because he's plugged in. And it's an unmarked ship, and they come aboard, and it's like a faction of different.
Well, it's the ship itself has drifted off course. Like
That's right.
It's supposed to be heading back towards. I don't know what is the government in Aliens called?
Space Force.
Space Force. the Wayland Yutani basically runs, so it's Wayland Space. So it's supposed to be heading back towards Wayland Space.
It's probably like privatized militaries that own most of the
Pretty
areas.
much, yeah.
So like
the soul system, it's massively corporatized.
Parts of the universe are. It's similar to Star Trek, where parts of the universe are set in quadrants.
Yeah.
Apparently, so this is all explained.
They've drifted out, and they've ended up in this quadrant of space run by a bunch of communist-based separatists called the Universal
UAC or something like that.
It was the UPP.
The UPP.
Union of Progressive Peoples. That was it.
How Bernie Sanders of them.
It was yeah. So it's space socialists, which very much kind of the way the characters were run kind of gave me images of the army in Red Dawn.
That's what I was. That's what I felt like too.
A bunch of Latin, Chinese, Cuban, Russian, German.
Mix of peoples from that would be considered communist at the time. So like the bad guys, quote unquote, right? The different people from the rest of the world.
Yeah,
we do a lot of quotation marks around this.
So these
given the times. Now this was a theme of movies at the time, even if it was like a backdrop theme. The commies were a bad guy in the shadows, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they aren't used in an oafish barbarian way in this. They pick up the ship, they're scrapping it, and they're like, well, let's take some of this stuff off. They end up taking some of it, and they're checking for information because it's a combat vessel. It's
right, yeah, this is a combat vessel has broken a treaty by floating into their space. So they go on board because this is a space marine vessel. This is a colonial marine vessel. So they're like, hey, there's a military vehicle. We got to check this out. They go in fully decked out in power armor to,
which is fucking
potentially
cool.
take on freaking space, colonial marines. They get on there, and what's great, is like Bishop's sort of barely conscious through this.
Yeah, he's running on like bare minimum.
Running on bare minimum. Well, it turns out, so when the queen stabs him with her tail and rips him in half,
it implants the last egg inside its
the last facehugger egg
inside its tail or whatever the breeding
into his body, which is the funny thing about these is he's a synth, so he's a robot, but he's a synthetic human being,
right?
So he's got enough biomass.
There's enough going on there because I think they need body heat and stuff like that. Once they're inside your famously inside your body, they can hatch and force the chest burster out. So it's easy to assume that a face hugger could hatch and lay dormant and wait inside of this carcass.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, which is still moist because it's full of moisture and super hot inside because they comment on the condensation and it's just
he's
steamed
got
up
condensation inside of his cryopod, where he's okay. So my cryopod isn't working. Something's wrong here. There's a lot of humidity in here, and I think something's moving around in here with me.
Detects something else inside me, another life mass possibly.
Yeah.
But he can't check it out.
So these space communists, they show up.
Like you do in an alien movie.
Like you do in an alien movie. They're like, okay, a bunch of people in cryopods. There's a lady, a kid, a little girl, and a fucked up android.
A colonial marine, a combat. He's a sergeant or whatever, a staff sergeant or something at the time.
Yeah.
They're like, this guy's an officer because they're like, something happened because he's fucked up.
Yeah.
Because he's got burns across his chest. Combat
he's
wounds.
all acid burned and everything from
the
aliens.
The rest of the cargo bay is in shambles because there's acid burns
fight,
everywhere. So because they fought the queen with that giant mech.
Yeah,
logo.
they're like, some fucked up shit happened on this ship. Like, what's going on?
So they check the synth. So that we're going to check the data banks and the memory on the synth.
Yeah, let's get that. Yeah, let's get that synthetic human. Let's get Bishop out, and we'll figure out what happened.
So there's good reason for them to open that pod and find out what the fuck is going on. And when they do, the facehugger is hatched and is alive inside and grabs the first guy. Unfortunately, is standing by.
Melts its way through his power armor, just like in Alien.
In the first one, yeah, right through the helmet.
Right through the helmet, gets on him and just injects itself.
And so the proceeds are just like in Alien 1, similar to Alien 1, because they're like, well, fuck, we got to get out of here. They get what they needed data-wise.
They leave that guy behind.
They leave him behind.
Who got hit by the face hugger because he's unconscious with the face hugger on him and everything. So they're like, well, fuck.
Yeah. So he's the down soldier. They just leave him in enemy territory. Basically, they leave him where you would because they're like, now it's a combat situation. We got to get out.
And the ship is self-correcting. It's about to go back into colonial space.
That's right.
And so they're like, okay, well, we got what we came for. Let's go.
And they take the data and they go back off to their faction and report their findings, and they start doing tests and find out about these creatures because they run back all the audio feeds and see everything.
They basically watch the whole movie of Aliens and realize very quickly what's going on.
And they find out about these perfect creatures. And to wipe out a platoon of colonial marines is no easy feat. These are considered high-end soldiers, space soldiers.
Their scientists realize, they're like, oh, this is some kind of weird freaking extraterrestrial bioweapon that they found.
Right.
And so they start doing their own little cloning experiments with it because they've got a little bit of the biomass left in Bishop's body.
Samples.
They've got cells from this alien, so they're like, well, let's poke and prod around. Meanwhile, at the same time, the colonial marine ship ends up getting picked up and docked up with a Weyland-Yutani station, space station that it's kind of this weird sort of almost biodome space station.
Right. That's where your wooden planet kind of thing would have come in. Right?
Yeah, where it's got a forest setting and everything on it. Like it sounds like it would have been a really cool setting. What's funny is I love the. Did you ever see the description? I think that was the Brandywine guys had for Gibson's screenplay, where it was space commies make monsters in Mall World.
Yeah, that's essentially what they were planning on doing.
That was kind of their elevator pitch.
And they were going to kind of do because like they end up going to where the commies are, right? Like the bishop and whatever takes. And all of them, they put new legs on him. They like rebuild him.
Yeah, they fix him up
shoddily
with
rebuild him
with their shoddy communist technology.
And they use him as a political hostage because they want that guy that they left on that ship.
They want the face hugger guy back.
And they're like, we want our guy back. So like, we'll trade him. No loss to us. You know what I mean? You can clearly see because they can deny that they got into his databanks and learned all this stuff, which is how Cold War stuff was happening back and forth. Where they're like, well, we know what's going on here, but give us our guy back and we'll give you your guy. And they're like,
well, and of course, as we established in Aliens, Weyland-Yutani is already interested in the xenomorph, in weaponizing it,
in the first
and
Alien
making
movie,
a product out of it to sell to militaries.
Which is my favorite part of the first movie, which I thought is more. That's the problem I have with how they carried the Alien series in the first place, because I feel like this script carried what the vision was supposed to be forward. The scariest thing about Alien is not the creature. It's not at all. The creature doesn't have to...
It's the bad decisions people make when they're...
It's the fact that they want to utilize it as a weapon. They want
to utilize it, yeah.
Because it's when the robot on the first ship, the android reads the thing and talks to Mother back with the home base, they tell him capture it by any means and keep it alive by any means, and the crew is expendable. So they're like, basically get rid of the crew. You can keep them alive if you can, but they're not worried about the crew anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They want the creature for that reason, because they're like, this thing is a perfect weapon.
Yeah, we can exploit this.
That's the biggest theme of the movie that I liked the most, which carries in the second one, because they have Paul Reiser, who's trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Where he's like, well, let's not blow up the fucking...
let's not blow up the colony, because...
yeah, we got to keep things going here. Everything's fine. And he's trying to, like, implant a face hugger into Ripley or one of the kids to take it back.
Right.
And they're like, you sick son of a bitch. Like, that's the whole theme, is against, like, this industrialized... There's a running theme.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond the background, like this, you know what I mean? Which they failed.
Greed clouding the judgment of, how to actually approach this thing. Because as this script kind of ends up pointing out, it turns out there is no way to control it. This thing is designed beyond control.
Yeah, it's
you
evolved.
Can't control the xenomorph.
It's evolved so perfectly that it was created by. There's backdrop. with your Prometheus film, where they explained how they created these bioweapons.
Yeah.
They were creating these weapons to
and
take over the
it was
universe.
cool to see kind of that being set up in the script already.
Right.
Like, if you want an Alien franchise that ties into Prometheus and stuff, this was the way to do it.
This is probably the better. This is what they were leaning on the whole time.
Yeah.
And we can talk about Alien Covenant later, because I will tear that film apart and explain to you. Did you watch it yet?
I haven't yet.
You should watch it, and then you'll see. I think there's parts of that movie that make it that are fucking so salvageable and so perfect. And there's parts that are just, you can tell where they wasted it. He threw it away because he's like, I can't do anything with this, because they want an alien, because they fucked up in the first Prometheus movie by Easter egging the xenomorph in the background.
Yeah.
Because in the backdrop of one of these things on the wall,
one of the engineer,
you can see
walls,
a queen laying eggs or something like that, and it's like symbolization of these creatures they've created. So it's a bioweapon that this creature has made.
Yeah.
Which has also led to making human beings. Which is, there's a cool theme we can run with them.
Right.
On those movies, we'll talk about that later. But you can see why this film freaked people out in the higher ups of Fox, because they're like, the whole theme of the film is like the communists are the bad guys. They probably only read like so far in the script.
Well, and it's not even so much that the communists are the bad guys.
That's
kind of the funny thing, is they're not really antagonists at any point.
No, and that's why I'm saying
story.
they're not used that way at all.
No,
and it's used smartly all the way through, because it's like everybody get along with the alien menace kind of thing. Richard Nixon said that in one of his speeches. If there was an alien threat, we would all have to band together.
We would all give up on this whole Cold War and
band
face
together
off
and work
against
together,
it.
which is what this is built on.
Which is what this is trying to build towards. Yeah.
So it's fucking genius in my mind. I was like, why the fuck couldn't they make something like this? So I was like, goddamn, like it just leads in, it just builds and builds and builds into better stuff.
Yeah. So eventually, like through all kinds, a series of unfortunate events, we end up with the Alien 3 that we have.
Right. So because Fox was shooting this down
6-7 years later,
this is the stuff that I knew going into it, which is why I had like scorn for Sigourney Weaver at the time. But it wasn't her fault. After doing some research here, some of it was, but some of it was, and I'll get to that now. So they get to the point where they're not going to make it because it's going to be an implied Marxist space, industrialized world
they
against
scrapped the William Gibson script.
In my eyes, it's a perfect complement to what the 80s were and like the end of the 80s.
Oh,
you know what I mean? It would have been a perfect set piece.
Even if it happened after the fall of the wall and stuff, I feel like it would have been a solid.
Yeah, well, it would have stood out like the other Alien films.
Yeah,
just like the other ones did. They were the aged perfectly.
I'm wondering if there was like some sort of weird personal issues with the executives and stuff when they looked at the script and kind of looked at this. There's more to it here for why they rejected it, I think, than what they actually say.
Is what I have on paper and what is hearsay, as far as like these are the events that led to the actual version of Alien, David Fincher's Alien 3.
Yeah.
There's something going on there. It wasn't just. I don't think it was like they won't be popular when this comes out. I think it was a power move over something else. And they started doing what all these bullshit studios do, where they start rewriting the script from the top down instead of like the guys who are actually creating it, which is why William Gibson was out right away. They threw him out. They're like, we can't use your script because we can't do the 2-part movie deal. We can't do any of this other stuff, so we have to readapt it. They want Sigourney Weaver as a mainline character.
Yeah, they're like, if we can't get Ridley Scott, we might as well get Sigourney Weaver back.
And they didn't tell Corporal Hicks himself that he wasn't out of the movie until...
Yeah, Michael Bain was
not informed until production almost started on the film.
He'd been told early on, through all of this, they're like, this will be your movie, this will be you, this will be, you're going to carry this story forward. And then these scripts keep coming out, and his character's got
I think it went
no
through
part in it.
9 iterations, but the... one of the earlier iterations of the rewrites was that Hicks dies, Newt dies, and Weaver's by herself. Yeah. And that stayed a theme in every script after that.
Well, so like, we're going to center this around Ripley.
Now, Weaver finds out that she's been moved into a bigger movie role. Also, the director that they had who was it that I had? It was Rennie Harlan was set to direct, and he dropped out right before production started, like a couple months.
Something, yeah.
Because he's like, I'm not gonna fucking play.
This is a clusterfuck.
So he walked out. They went through like 2 other options and ended up sticking with David Fincher because at the time he was doing like music videos and shitty.
Yeah, he was not a big production director at the time, but he was a well-established figure.
Efficient and cheap. He was a cheap director,
reliable.
Which is what they wanted for the basic structure of this film to begin with, because that's the hallmark of the Alien movies from an executive side. Cheap money in, big money out. You know what I mean? So like that's their big returns. Their capital off the top is what they're looking at. That's what they're trying to build through this whole process. Weaver comes back in after being informed that she's going to be the mainline role and starts making bigger demands on what she wants changes. She wants the script to be more original and different, which is what led to where we're going now. Mm-hmm. This is forcing several rewrites. They fired the directors because she wanted Walter Hill and David Giller,
which were the Brandywine guys,
to do the rewrites on everything else. Mm-hmm. So they had to come in and do the writing on the whole script from the ground up, which is why we have such a long production point. This is like 3 years in, where they're trying to get the finalized version of this movie. She wanted no weapons.
She was big time anti-gun at the time.
She had just got nominated for an Oscar or something like that, or something big.
Yeah.
So she was able to walk with the fucking enough weight to make these demands. She wanted a $5 million salary. She wanted the movie to be more original, which fucking trashed the commies in space fight in a mall idea. So they rewrote it to which would have gone to this. They would have taken that idea and done this wooden planet with monks, which would get rid of your weapons, which is a cool concept in itself.
Yeah, it's very avant-garde sci-fi kind of thing, taking things into a whole new aesthetic. So these Luddite monks living in a wooden satellite colony planet thing. So would have been pretty cool looking. But then production designers were just like, you know what kind of a budget that would take to try and make something completely original like that.
Yeah.
The thing that worked with Alien was all of our backdrop and everything is just stuff. Like we're making stuff that just looks like a spaceship.
Yeah.
You know, hiding the things that we can't hide in darkness.
On a small handful of sets once again.
Yeah.
So and miniatures, miniatures are what your world building stuff was built off of. All those
your establishing shots, all of your deals there.
Everything's done with miniatures through the whole thing for the first 2 movies. That's how they do it. So they were like, that's fucking not going to work.
That is not going to happen.
It's going to be way too big and way too expensive. So they rearrange it, and they're like, let's do it on a prison planet with prisoners instead of monks. And some of those monk themes carried through with some of the
a lot of themes ended up carrying through to the final film. There's that initial idea. That was kind of the direction that they wanted, was just a group of Luddites in space against the alien. Was kind of the
no weapons, no nothing, nobody to watch them. It was a prison, and then they stopped using it as a prison, and these guys chose to stay behind. To live there. They wanted to live their lives out away from everybody and away from sin and women and.
Then Sigourney Weaver's final demand was her character Ripley had to die.
Exactly.
This had to be the end of Ripley's story,
which they fucking didn't do.
Which they didn't actually end up doing.
Because they redid the Alien Resurrection, which was a fucking giant slap in the fucking face to everybody, and she agreed to do it for some reason, right? I don't know if that was ego or what. I think it was definitely like ego driven. A little resurgence of her resurrection of her career, what have you. That was a dumb laugh. She wanted all these things, but they had more problems on the production, so it's fucking cursed all the way through. And the main guy, one of the bigger guys that I said were in it, was let me pull up his name here. Jordan Cornwell. Cornwell was the cinematographer for the movie.
Yeah.
Who dropped out of the movie in the first 2 weeks because he developed bad symptoms for Parkinson's.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. He developed Parkinson's. Well, they, what was it? The Brandywine guys told him to drop out. He was fully on board to keep doing it stuff, but they were just like, no, dude, we've seen Parkinson's hit people before and stuff.
This production would have killed him.
Yeah.
No, it would have been so rigorous and so. painstaking that he died several years after this.
Yeah, so they told him to drop out. They're like, look, man, don't spend your last little bit on this cursed production.
He's well known for setting the aesthetic for movies like Blade Runner. He made Blade Runner look the way Blade Runner looks.
Yeah.
And that's the theme that we were going to go have in the film, which would have made a different aesthetic completely. It probably would have changed the film completely. It still would have stood out on its own because good camera tricks and a good director, despite all the bullshit, can still make something happen. And the cinematographer is really important. Like in the new Blade Runner, that cinematography is so crisp and precise, and people talk about that more than the actual film. Yeah, because it's so beautifully put together. And that's what we were going to have leading into this Alien movie. But God rest his soul.
So going into the David Fincher production, they were already like months into pre-production with a half-completed script.
Right, they were writing the script as they were putting the movie along.
And so that means, and your pre-production is setting up your sets, your special effects. If they were just barely getting into digital computer-generated effects and stuff. So that means you got to get your pre-production for your digital effects planned out and laid out and stuff and set up and ready for that. And so if you don't have a story in an effects-driven sci-fi story, you're going to end up with questionable effects.
And there's another thing too. So there are 2 cuts of the movie that he was working on. He had his vision, and then they made him change it halfway through, like you're saying. In the original cut of Alien 3, it's supposed the facehugger grabs onto an ox.
Yeah.
So that the creature that comes out is like 10 foot tall.
It's a super xenomorph.
It's gigantic when it comes out and has these gigantic brutish strength tendencies and can fucking knock steel doors over. Not like any of the other ones. It can go straight through walls if it wants to, you know what I mean, to get to what it wants. And they changed it to a dog halfway through, which is why you see scale differences in the film.
Yep.
For instance, if the shower scene, somebody gets killed in the shower pretty early on.
Well, it's the hospital room scene.
The hospital room scene does it also.
Yeah.
Because she's standing there, she comes out of the shower or something like that, and then they do the jump scare. But it's standing up behind a curtain, and it's huge.
It's massive.
It's fucking gigantic.
It's 8-9 feet tall. Yeah.
And so that's why she freaks out, because this thing is fucking there. She has the queen inside her, so it can't kill her, which is a fucking shit on the whole concept of this script for Alien 3, because that creature could have become the queen with enough hosts. But they made it so that it's implanted. She's implanted with the queen, which is how they got her to die, her hill to die on at the end of the film.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of fucking big changes here, which is why I don't like 3 as much, because they stepped on the rules of the previous 2 movies, which do such a good job of laying out how this monster works. Your idea is to wrap around this creature in your scenes and its rules, right? You can kill it like this, but not like this, like your zombies. Shoot them in the head, right? And burn the bodies or whatever. Romero set those out pretty stand up on what your rules are in the film, which everybody followed after that. They don't follow any of those rules because they're inconsistent with the production of this film. Because the behavior changes, and then they did it like a weird wide-angle lens thing. So like in one scene, it's super small. But like the final scene, it's big, and it's like cornered in the lead vats or whatever, where they're melting the lead. And it's pretty big. It's up. The guy that's standing in there is about 6 foot tall, and it's up above him.
It's towering over him, yeah.
And he's trapped inside with it. But in other scenes, it's the size of a Rottweiler running around and killing people. And a lot of people in that film are killed off screen.
Yeah.
Main characters that they establish later on. Supposedly, this is worked on in the assembly cut of the film. But from what I've heard, I haven't watched it, it's... what made the film bad was shit poor editing and the shitty story that was being written along with the film. You can't salvage it because there's nothing there to work with in the beginning at all. It was just a cursed project from the beginning. So the relevance of this audiobook, to me, is more important than anything I've stumbled upon of recent, even more than the Schneider cut, which we'll get into next. But it's along the same lines as what the existence of the Schneider cut means.
Right.
Because it's somebody cared enough to take this script from William Gibson and look at it and be like, holy fuck, like this is really good. How come they never made this? Same as me or you, if we had picked it up and actually read it and developed it into something that we could actually play out. So they did an audiobook. Audibles has rights to it. It's their production.
What's even better is it's not even really an audiobook. It's a it's an audio drama, like a radio show.
Right. Super high performance,
high production,
sound engineering.
A big cast, full cast of voice talent. But what they did is they bring back Michael Biehn and Lance Henriksen to reprise their roles as Bishop and Hicks.
That's right.
Because the script centered around those characters, and so they managed to bring back these actors to reprise their roles, who
were okay with doing it and excited about doing it.
They were super into it. Yeah,
they were like, "Fuck it, I'll do that right away," which just blew me away because I was like, they wanted to do this. Like they wanted to do this.
Yeah,
they wanted to do something that maybe nobody would hear about. You know what I mean? It's picking up in popularity. I'm going to try to spread the word myself, but that these guys would come down from whatever they were doing at the time, and they're still filming shit like crazy.
Yeah,
they stopped what they're doing to work on this. They're like, we'll shoot the Alien 3 that we were going to be in from the fucking beginning, and it fits so perfectly as a follow-up to Alien 2. I don't want to give up too many spoilers. We did the beginning.
Well, and that's the cool thing is it dovetails so perfectly. The story does with Alien 2 and stuff. It's just a direct continuation. I made the comparison when we were talking about it before, when we were texting each other back and forth. Was it gave me the vibes of Back to the Future, the way they all those movies just continuously dovetail into each other.
Yeah, and it's so, but becoming an individual film in their own right.
Yeah,
they exist perfectly on their own.
But like perfect callbacks to previous things and everything, and able to, because Alien 3, there's almost like no callbacks really to anything previous, and any callbacks that are there either like piss you off because they're just like, we killed off Newton Hicks and stuff, and that just immediately pissed everybody off, or just like didn't make any sense. Where Lance Henriksen shows up again at the end of Alien 3, and he's like, I'm not Bishop, I'm the guy who designed Bishop. And you're like, well...
I was alive the whole time.
I was alive the whole time. You're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Who the fuck are you?
Yeah.
Why are you fucking here? It was the most ham-fisted way to put Lance Henriksen back into the film.
They shot that afterwards.
Yeah.
That was a reshoot. They finished the film, and they were like, this fucking sucks. So they reshot the ending.
Yeah,
all of that part leading up to that, which is why it looks better than like the rest of the film leading up to it, because they reshot it with expensive cameras and everything, and then stuffed it onto the back end of the film, and that's why he's like, "Don't kill yourself, don't do it." That whole thing, and the Nostromo computer, the data that they fill out on it ends on a computer.
Yeah,
which is like a stroke of somebody's genius to like try to save the fucking film. In the last half, it doesn't fucking fit, but it does give like some kind of ending to the fucking franchise.
Some kind of resolution, yeah.
To make her fucking sacrifice somewhat meaningful, you know what I mean? It fits for the movie, but not in the rest of the fucking franchise.
Not in the rest of the series or anything at all.
And unfortunately, the rest of the films do this.
Yeah,
horribly. They stumble in on top of each other. They do Resurrection, which is a fucking nightmare to watch. The fact that she okayed coming back to do it when it's so fucking like cheaply, shallowly done. I don't have any good things to say about it, dude. Like, it's gross from the beginning.
No.
Like, none of the reveals are surprising. They get to the fucking Winona Ryder's and
so much of Resurrection is you can tell is kind of a little bit taken from the Michael Biehn script.
It is.
Where it's, okay, now we're on a research station, and we're experimenting with xenomorph DNA and things.
It was scrapped
making clones.
It was scrapped for
mutants.
Parts. But so the best parts of that were scrapped for parts.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what they were trying to make, but they fucked everything up because they recast it weird, and it's probably because Weaver was like, well, this is how it has to be, and I have to have a cat. I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Because to get her to come in and sit down to do it, you know what I mean?
Well, what would have been cool would have been to kind of have the cast from Resurrection, but doing the the William Gibson script of Alien 3, because I actually really like a lot of that cast from Resurrection.
There's a lot of people
Ron
there.
Perlman, you got Brad Dourif, you've got just some.
Well, that's the thing, is that they got elements of the films right, but they executed it so poorly that it leaves a bad taste in my mouth when I think about it. Because the characters stand out, interestingly enough, like they're like space pirates, kind of like it's almost if Firefly was an alien.
Yeah,
that's kind of how they were going for, I feel like, but without the humor. So the cast is likable, and you can get around most of the fucking bullshit. But the problem is it's just so sloppily put together, and like it's like an Independence Day. Like, that movie sucked. It just wasn't good, and it's not memorable. The only part of the film that stands out is the fucking Ripley clones, which was, I think, a runoff of what they might have been working on later on, the cloning. So
that's a lot of
spoilers
of the Alien 3, yeah.
So in this script for this audio performance, that's what they're playing with. So there's alien hybrids.
They find out that the DNA of the xenomorph lends itself very easily to artificial growth stimulus,
right,
and stuff. So they just like the smallest little prod, and it'll just,
and it can become airborne. And
so then it starts to try and self-replicate through essentially spores and stuff, and just because it's the perfect parasite. It's just the whole idea behind the whole thing and stuff is it's the perfect sort of blending.
It's a being that wants
predator,
to exist no
parasite, virus. It's just every bad possible biological thing. Like, that's what this thing is.
It's
that's
the
what
most
the xenomorph is.
Opposite of human that you can get.
Yeah, it's just being of pure destruction.
And
undiluted destruction.
And I love it so much. Some of those themes are in Covenant, Alien Covenant.
Yeah.
They do the spores.
Yeah.
They do the same kind of thing, but it's not explained. So this William Gibson script has been parted out I don't know how many fucking times and recreated into something else. You know what I mean? I just don't know what to fucking think about. Like, it's such a disappointment that they never kept their footing, but everybody liked it so much that they would steal from it. They would take parts from it forevermore. Yeah. And probably for the next fucking 20 Alien movies that they make in the future, and whatever reboot we're probably going to get that's unannounced. No spoilers on that, but we're due. We're due for a fucking franchise reboot. And it scares me because I don't think you can bottle lightning like they bottled it the first two times.
No.
And the third one would have been a runoff of the second film and similar to the second film, but it only complements the other movies beautifully. And it's like a crown jewel, in my opinion. These other two movies would have been the perfect complement to the whole franchise. And to wrap it up, I can only imagine how they ended it. You know what I mean? Because they wanted to go to the aliens' home world, and that's where Prometheus.
Right. They try and trace back the source of this
in order to.
So then that's where kind of the whole Alien Covenant thing would have kind of tied in. Was you basically go to that world, and you could have this whole freaking backstory with Prometheus. Like, that's the thing with this is the way that this story runs in this audio drama. In a way, you can engineer it to work so well with what Ridley Scott later did with Prometheus and Covenant, and make it pretty goddamn cool.
Right.
And so that's I think the most. The thing I'm most happy about with this audio drama is that you could almost just fit it in and just keep it there. Ignore the stuff that you don't like that's happened later on in the, with the movie productions.
I do.
You can ignore the David Fincher Alien 3. You can ignore Alien Resurrection, and you can have this and pretty much consider it canon. And it having members of the original cast reprising characters just makes it all the better. And just lends that level of legitimacy to it, and giving you like a satisfactory use of these characters that you always wanted.
The thing that you always wanted. That's exactly right.
Which is something that the Disney Star Wars movies were never able to deliver on. You got these actors to reprise their characters, and you never got what you always wanted from these characters, from the reprisal of their characters.
No resolution.
No resolution. Now, not even just like a reconnection or anything of these characters, of kind of the dynamic that they had or anything, and it just no revisiting of past character themes, which this one does beautifully, because there's the whole idea at the end of, which they reference specifically in the recap of the ending of Aliens, is the whole idea of, will Bishop stay to pick up Ripley or not, or will he take off? Because do we trust Bishop to be compassionate enough to stick around long enough to rescue Ripley and Newt, to take them off the planet, or will he just decide on survival and just leave them behind?
Right.
And he pays it off. He's like, no, I came back. The platform was going to collapse and stuff. Sorry, I scared you.
Yeah,
but no, I always planned on you sticking around to pick you up, and stuff. And so, great payoff to the character, and we pay it off again in this script.
Yeah, you like the ending? Yeah.
I love it. I fucking love it.
Yeah,
Where like
too.
the whole time Bishop's just like, I'm not gonna make it. Just go.
Yeah.
I don't matter. And stuff. And Hicks is just like, fuck you, man. Get over here.
Yeah,
Let's go.
Like, and the whole time he's always calling back. He's like, you all right, man? Like, are we gonna fucking make it? He's like, no, I'll be fine. With his great voice, he has a great whistled voice for this whole thing. But the fucking the contrast to his character too, because he shows up with a pistol and he's like, oh, I would have killed you both if you changed.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, what the fuck? Where'd you get that pistol from? He's like, I had it. I found it a long time ago.
Found it on the chick's body. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's like, what were you going to do with it? He's like, I would have killed you both if you turned. He's like, that's how I know you're not aliens. It's like, congratulations.
Congratulations.
You guys made it. So his character fucking follows all the way through, or he's got to follow like Data priority protocols, but he's a lot more human than you lead off from Data in Star Trek, where he's like, no, I made the choices. He's like, but the right thing to do would have been to put you down.
Yeah.
He's like, because you would have, spoiler alert, humans mutate on the fucking ship. And when the real alien comes in contact with the mutant, they fight.
Yeah, it's like this freaking Jurassic Park Velociraptor versus T-Rex kind of
fight. You
get
this
happens.
fucking awesome mutant alien fight that we didn't get to fucking see. And they have like their one-liners and shit at the end. And it's like, dude, like it fucking hits so perfect. It fits perfect in like the alien everything. And it's just we got robbed with whatever. Like, and I'll defend parts of.
One part I'd love to see is that escape by that Chinese chick when the
through the radiation and stuff.
Yeah, well, when the socialist vessel is just falling into chaos, and there's just people mutating left and right and stuff, and she's just running trying to get to the last ship to escape, and before they nuke the the ship and everything and stuff. Like I just the audio production of that scene it's just so awesome.
It's vividly laid out where you
vividly
can
lays
picture.
out, gets the pictures in your mind of like what's going on, where you're like, oh man.
And that's the thing is like I'm gonna go back and watch Aliens 2 and then reread the book, because the visual theme of everything is explained, but without telling you, because you've watched the other movies. It's so well laid out that you can just grasp it and be like. I sat in my car because I have great surround sound.
That was what I did too.
Oh fuck! Yeah. It was fucking awesome to listen to, and because I have the subwoofers and everything, so when the explosions were happening or the creature was hissing, I could sit there in the car and I was just like, yeah. I went and got food and I was just sitting there in my car.
I did too. I just got McDonald's and just like sat in a parking lot. I was like,
I'm fucking sick, dude. And I'll do it again too. I want to just drive somewhere to fucking listen to it again. Because I've listened to it like twice now, but I want to examine it again. I liked it enough to where I'd like to listen to it again.
And it's so easy to go back into because it's a movie in and of itself because it's only 2 hours long. It's based off of the screenplay. They pace it just like they would if they were making the movie. And so that's why I say it's like, look, if you fell off of the Alien franchise like everybody else after Aliens, and just don't really like or even consider the rest of it as anything more than just
if you're hardcore into it, yeah,
a Hollywood hack job and stuff that ruined something beautiful. Take this, and just use it as your continuity and stuff, as the actual continuity of the story.
Well, I kind of want to get sort of final words on your thoughts on the Alien 3 audio production, kind of how it fits, because we've kind of heard my thoughts of like how it fits into all of these things. What are your thoughts on that?
It's just disappointment, man. Like really, when it comes
of just
down
what
to
we
it,
got on film.
I just feel bad about how things turned out. You know what I mean? Because it was so good, and I think that's what breaks my heart the most about it. There are high points. Like I feel positive that there are people that want to make this.
Yeah.
They want to do this.
Yeah.
And I like that. I'm excited about that. But history will only remember what happened and what we have. And so like this, the audiobook may never make it out to fucking the crowd that we want. You know what I mean? Because there's only so many people that will access it. But so...
Well, people that are pirating it, I've actually found a few pirated copies and stuff. So it's getting outside of the Audible marketplace.
I'm hoping so. I'm not saying it's okay to pirate stuff, but the more people that get this in their hands, the better.
I think the more it gets into the public eye. But I'm just happy. I love new avenues of entertainment. People get wrapped up into thinking that the be all end all for like the best moneymaker or whatever, or the best format for any story to be told is in the movies, and it's just not. There are stories that you should not try to adapt into a film. Film is for telling very specific types of stories.
Well, they got away with it for so long,
right? And so if you're gonna make a comic book to be told as a really good comic book. That's how we ended up with classic comic books. We're not getting classic comic books now because everybody writing comic books now is writing them so that they can be eventually adapted into a screenplay, or they are from an adapted screenplay for a movie or a TV show.
How about that?
They're not written for and so they don't end up as classic comic books. How many people Red is a comic book movie? How many people have read the graphic novel of Red? Nobody has, because it's not a classic, because it's not actually a very good comic book, because it's adapted from a screenplay. It was always meant to be a movie.
Valid.
And so that I'm glad that even something that was meant for a movie can be is a story that can be told effectively, not in film format. So the fact that it's not a film doesn't matter to me. I'm glad that it's a story that is out there, is told effectively, and is told by the people that were originally involved, and
people were passionate about
and
this.
were passionate about it.
It wouldn't have been done if it wasn't like a fucking passion project that somebody sought out.
Yeah.
And this is another thing where Hollywood is winking at itself, because people in Hollywood know about the fuck up, the Alien 3 fuck up.
Yeah.
It's gotten around enough.
It's legendary. Yeah.
That people know about this fuck up. Maybe not everyday people, which is why we went over a brief history of some of it. You can look it up. You can find YouTube videos all over the place about the history of what Alien 3 could have been. This is just a small piece, because there could be so many more like that that were just never what they were supposed to be, like the Snyder Cut.
Well, sometimes you end up with a terrible production like this that gets a passable, if not good, result, and so you never really hear that backstory of just.
There's probably,
and in fact, like that backstory will end up sounding heroic instead of disastrous, because the end result was good enough.
Untold films that have had the same history with positive effects because the film was likable enough for people to overlook the bullshit, man. Like there's shit that's popular today. Like I don't like Avatar. People like Avatar because they were blown away by the special effects for whatever fucking reason. I don't know why people like Avatar, bro. I don't want to start talking about this.
Well, let's take the story of the production of Ghostbusters. It's not a smooth running story.
No, the original one?
In fact, that was a movie that was made for a release date rather than for an actual result, but they ended up making, one of the most killer movies ever.
It's considered
as a result.
a legendary film.
And so instead of it being a disastrous story, and there's a lot of different things that, sort of run parallel to the Alien 3 story. Different writers being involved in different story ideas, and the paring down, and the the production difficulties, and the studio executive changes, and the mandates from on high, and all of this stuff. But we still ended up with one of the most killer movies of all time as an end result. And so we look back on that history and we're like, oh, what a bunch of legends working on this.
Well, we talked about this earlier at the beginning of the podcast too, is that it's binary response.
Yeah.
It's either good or bad.
Yep.
And what is almost always the response, I've been talking about this for fucking how long? What is the response that somebody gives after they watch a movie? What is it when you ask them?
Was it good? Was it bad? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you ask them, what did you do this weekend? Oh, we went to go see a movie. Well, what'd you see? Oh, I saw such and such. Oh, how was it? It was good. The end.
Yeah, most people aren't having conversations like we do about the movies that we watch.
It was either good or it was bad, and they can't tell you why.
Mm-hmm.
They were just like, yeah, great. And that's the fucking the setting in which movies are released. It's not. I mean, and we're talking about something that doesn't matter in the long run. It doesn't affect everybody's daily lives.
No.
About us arguing about
the
history of a film, or how a film was made, or the upcoming films beyond like artistic value over schlocky fucking how can I cash in after the Avengers Endgame, which we're heading into this fucking realm now where people are going to just anything that sticks to the board. Because we're going to get into some weird deep water after this superhero slope.
We are.
And there's going to be a lot of stuff where people are like, oh, I liked it, regardless of if it was good or not. Because they want to justify the time spent and the money spent. And they feel good about themselves because they did those things. Now they have ownership of that movie.
Mm-hmm.
That was their memory. That's why people defend Star Wars when you start taking it apart, they get fucking offended. Because they're like, well, it was good. And then if you ask them, well, why the fuck was it good? They have nothing. They have nothing to tell you.
Because I felt satisfied after spending my freaking $17 on it. Yeah,
I was a child and I spent the IMAX. We paid IMAX to go see it and I spent $100. I was like, good. Well, you don't fucking remember the $100. You don't. All you remember is you went to go see the movie and you had a binary response after you watched it. Good or bad? Good. Gets put in the good memory area, but you don't ever watch it again or whatever. Give a fuck about the movie afterwards. It doesn't affect your life. And it's one of those things like with Alien 3, this book or this production, it could have just disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it had all the means to just disappear and just never be talked about.
Yeah, if there was never a movie at the end result of it and stuff, nobody would even, like, maybe occasionally somebody would ask, why didn't they ever make another Alien movie?
Right.
Maybe that would be, but then at the same time, like, we wouldn't get into the specifics. What we ended up with was Alien 3, such a starkly withdrawn result from everything else that we'd seen before from this franchise, that we're like, there has to be a story there, and so we care about it.
Yeah, I mean, not everybody does. Like, I talked to a lot of people about this shit, and I get to the point to where I'm fucking boring. Because I'll be like, well, what did you think about this film? Because I want to hear people's thoughts and how they feel about these things. Because I want to hear outside input. Not just my own, because I look at things like way too critically with this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to feel what the other people are feeling when they just watched it. And we're like, yeah, remember it? Can you describe the movie to me and like walk me through parts of the movie and just let them describe what they remember and just see what they can check on and check off as they go through it. And they'll start reviewing it from memory. And you know whether they liked it or not. You know what I mean? Because they're like, now they're thinking about it. Yeah, I guess you're right. This and that, blah, blah, blah. But with Alien, responses are moderately positive because David Fincher did a decent job of stitching something together. I'm not going to fucking not defend what we got because I thought it was decent. It was adequate for the needs at the time. It's amazing that they got the fucking film made.
Yeah.
Given the history that we have.
Well, and this goes back to what we were saying before, that the reason why David Fincher has such a solid career now, you can probably attribute to the fact that, hey, this movie with this troubled production, David Fincher got it done.
He marched through it, which
he
was
marched
impressive.
through it, and he got it done, and he took it to the fucking finish line.
I didn't even go over. I breezed through the stuff I wrote down. I wrote down a synopsis of like events, and that's not even all of them.
Mm-hmm.
I just summarized some things to talk about in the podcast and bring up facts that I could look up and verify and check. I spent an afternoon doing it just because I was like, I wanted to, right before I read the book, or listened to the book, excuse me, I was like, let me go through the production again. Because it's like
get an idea on the background.
Yeah, you need to have a foundation to stand on, because it's something that exists now. It is in the ethos. It exists. We listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it real.
It is, yeah.
Whether or not it's canon or not, that doesn't matter. It exists. And that's important to me, is that it exists. Somebody made that. And they did a really good job making it high production. Same with the original product of Alien 3. And you can retcon things easily these days.